Thunder tears across the sky of Olympus, and in its blinding light stands Zeus, ruler of the gods, master of lightning, an eternal symbol of divine justice. To mortals, he is remembered as the great hero who shattered the tyranny of the Titans and brought order to a broken cosmos. His name is spoken with awe, his image carved into stone, his victories sung in the voices of poets. But history, especially the kind written by the victorious, has a dangerous habit of hiding its darkest truths. What if Zeus was not only a liberator, but also a conqueror? Before Olympus rose, the universe was ruled by Cronus and the Titans, brutal, paranoid, and cruel. They devoured their own children, enslaved the forces of nature, and ruled through fear. When Zeus rebelled, it was seen as an act of cosmic salvation. The chains were broken. The Titans were defeated. A new age was born. Yet behind every revolution lies a question that no legend dares to ask. What was the real price of that victory? Zeus did not take power through negotiation or justice. He took it through war, thunder, and annihilation. The Titans were not judged, they were erased. Their voices were buried beneath Tartarus, and their story was silenced forever. And so, the only version of history that survived was Zeus's. As the skies cleared and Olympus shone in golden glory, no one dared to wonder whether the new king of the gods was truly different from the tyrant he overthrew, or merely a stronger version of the same darkness. Because when absolute power changes hands, the world may be saved, but the truth is often lost. Part 1. Zeus, the hero who overthrew the tyranny of the Titans. Before Zeus ever ruled the skies, before Olympus glittered with marble and immortal fire, the universe was a place ruled not by justice, but by fear. The Titans were the first great gods, colossal beings born from Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the endless sky. Among them, Cronus rose to supreme power after overthrowing his own father in a brutal act of cosmic betrayal. He was not crowned by law, nor chosen by fate. He seized the throne with blood-soaked hands, slicing Uranus apart and casting his broken body into the abyss. From that moment on, the universe learned a terrible truth. Power belonged to whoever was willing to take it. Cronus ruled from a throne of terror. The stars moved at his command, the oceans trembled beneath his will, and even the other Titans feared his gaze. Yet despite his immense strength, Cronus was haunted by a prophecy, one whispered by Gaia herself. One of your children will destroy you, as you destroyed your father. Fear became his shadow, paranoia his closest companion. And so Cronus did the unthinkable. Each time his wife Rhea gave birth, he swallowed the newborn whole, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, locking them alive inside his endless stomach, entombed in darkness before they could ever see the world. To Cronus, it was not cruelty. It was survival. But fate does not bend forever. When Rhea became pregnant once more, something within her broke. The grief, the rage, the unbearable sorrow of losing yet another child hardened into rebellion. With Gaia's guidance, she hid the infant Zeus away on the island of Crete, while giving Cronus a stone wrapped in cloth to swallow in his place. Cronus, blind with fear and arrogance, devoured it without question. And so Zeus lived, hidden in a sacred cave, nursed by the divine goat Amalthea, guarded by warrior spirits who clashed their shields to hide his cries. Zeus grew not just in strength, but in awareness. He learned of his siblings imprisoned inside Cronus. He learned of the tyranny of the Titans. And slowly, within him, something far greater than lightning began to form. A purpose. When Zeus came of age, he did not rush into war. He was not yet powerful enough to challenge the Titans directly. Instead, he used cunning, disguise, patience. Disguised as a servant, Zeus infiltrated Cronus's court. There, he mixed a powerful potion into his father's drink, one that forced Cronus to vomit up what he had swallowed. One by one, Zeus's siblings were released, reborn into the light after years of imprisonment. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. Together, they stood before the Titan king, no longer helpless children, but gods ready to fight. The war that followed would shake the foundations of existence. The Titanomachy, the war of the gods, lasted 10 years. 10 years of storms, earthquakes, and celestial bloodshed. Olympus burned. The oceans boiled. Mountains were torn from the earth and hurled like weapons. The Titans were ancient, vast, and brutal. But Zeus had something they did not. Allies. He descended into Tartarus and freed the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants imprisoned by the Titans. In gratitude, they forged for Zeus the greatest weapon ever known, the thunderbolt, a fragment of the raw power of creation itself, shaped into a weapon. To Poseidon, they gave the trident, ruler of the seas. To Hades, the helm of darkness, which rendered him invisible. For the first time, the Titans faced something truly terrifying. A united front. Zeus led the charge, hurling lightning across the battlefield. Each bolt tore through Titan flesh, splitting mountains, igniting the sky. The very laws of nature bent beneath his power. But Zeus was not just a warrior. He was a symbol. To the enslaved forces of the universe, he was rebellion. To the oppressed, he was hope. To the Titans, he was judgment. One by one, the Titans fell. Cronus, at last, stood face to face with the sun he had tried to erase. Lightning clashed against ancient scythes, sky against time, future against past. And when Cronus finally collapsed, the age of Titans ended. The defeated were cast into Tartarus, sealed behind unbreakable gates, guarded by the monstrous Cenomanes. The old rulers of the cosmos were buried alive beneath the world they once controlled, and Zeus ascended the throne of the universe. To many, this was the dawn of justice. The chains had been broken. The devourer of children had fallen. The sky was free. Zeus was hailed as the savior of the gods. And for a time, he was. But even in this moment of triumph, a shadow lingered. Because Zeus had done what all rulers before him had done. He had taken power through war, and the thunder that crowned him king was forged in blood. Part 2. Zeus, the new tyrant behind the throne of thunder. When the Titans fell and Tartarus sealed shut, the universe exhaled for the first time in an age. Mountains stopped burning. The oceans calmed. The sky cleared. To the gods of Olympus and the fragile world of mortals below, it appeared that justice had finally won. Zeus stood at the peak of Mount Olympus, thunder resting in his hand like a divine scepter. He was young, radiant, victorious. Poets would one day sing of him as the great liberator, the savior of the cosmos, the king who ended tyranny. But power does not disappear when a tyrant falls. It merely changes hands. At first, Zeus ruled as he had promised. The heavens were ordered, the seas given to Poseidon, the underworld to Hades, the harvest to Demeter. Even Hera, though burdened by her future, was crowned queen of Olympus. The world was divided, balanced, structured. Yet beneath this apparent harmony, something darker was growing. Zeus had not only defeated the Titans, he had learned from them. The first sign was Tartarus. The Titans had not been tried. They had not been judged. They had not been forgiven. They had been erased, locked away forever in eternal torment, stripped of voice, history, and memory. Their side of the story would never be heard. To Zeus, this was justice. To the universe, it was silence. And silence is the first weapon of every tyrant. Soon after, the gods themselves began to feel the weight of Zeus's rule. He did not debate. He commanded. He did not seek consensus. He declared law. Anyone who questioned him was reminded, subtly or violently, of the thunderbolt that never left his hand. Even Poseidon, master of the seas, learned to lower his eyes in Zeus's presence. Even Hades, ruler of the dead, obeyed without argument. Because Zeus was not simply king. He was unstoppable. But Zeus's greatest fear was not rebellion from Olympus. It was prophecy. Like Cronus before him, Zeus was haunted by whispers of fate. Oracles spoke of a child who would one day overthrow him. The echoes of Gaia's ancient warnings still lingered in the bones of the world. And fear, once again, was born. So Zeus did what all terrified rulers do. He tried to control destiny. When Metis, the goddess of wisdom, became pregnant with Zeus's child, prophecy foretold that her son would surpass his father. Zeus did not hesitate. He swallowed her whole, not out of hunger, but out of terror. The universe shuddered. A god consuming a goddess. A king devouring the future. From inside Zeus's body, Metis lived on, and from her, Athena would one day be born, tearing her way out of Zeus's skull in a burst of divine agony. The parallels to Cronus were undeniable. And yet Zeus never saw it. Zeus also ruled mortals, not as a distant observer, but as a manipulator. He descended to earth in countless disguises: bulls, swans, storms, kings, and shadows. He seduced, deceived, and conquered human women, leaving behind children who would become heroes and tragedies. Every affair created chaos. Every divine romance ended in suffering. For the women, for their families, for the children caught between godhood and humanity. And when mortals suffered, Zeus rarely intervened, because suffering was not his concern. Control was. Perhaps the clearest proof of Zeus's tyranny was Prometheus, the Titan who had sided with Zeus during the war, the Titan who had helped humanity, the Titan who stole fire, not for power, but for survival. Zeus could not tolerate disobedience. He chained Prometheus to a rock and condemned him to eternal torture. Every day, an eagle would devour his liver. Every night, it would grow back. Forever. All because Prometheus dared to give humans knowledge Zeus wanted to keep. This was not justice. This was fear wearing the mask of law. Slowly, the gods realized the truth. Zeus had not ended tyranny. He had perfected it. Unlike Cronus, who ruled openly through terror, Zeus ruled through divine authority. His cruelty was hidden behind the language of order. His violence was justified as necessity. His paranoia disguised as wisdom. Olympus became a golden cage. Beautiful, powerful, and inescapable. The thunder that once symbolized freedom had become the sound of obedience. And the god who once promised never to become like Cronus had become something far more dangerous. Because Zeus did not believe himself to be a tyrant. He believed himself to be right. Part 3. Zeus, God, monster, or something in between. By the time Olympus reached the height of its glory, the universe no longer remembered the sound of chains breaking. It remembered only thunder. Zeus sat upon a throne carved from cloud and starlight, crowned by lightning, feared by gods and mortals alike. To the world, he was the eternal king, the lawgiver, the skyfather, the guardian of cosmic order. Temples rose in his name. Sacrifices burned on 1,000 altars. His image was carved into mountains and coins and stories. And yet beneath this divine worship lay a deeper, darker truth. Zeus was no longer just a god. He was a system of fear, desire, punishment, and power, one that shaped every corner of existence. To ask whether Zeus was a god or a monster is to misunderstand him. He was something far more dangerous. He was both. The ancient myths often portray Zeus as the protector of justice, the one who punished oath-breakers, defended hospitality, and upheld cosmic law. But the same God who punished injustice also committed it. The same thunder that struck down criminals also silenced the innocent. And so the question arises, was Zeus truly defending order, or merely defending his throne? To answer this, we must look not at his enemies, but at those closest to him. Hera, queen of Olympus, is often remembered as jealous and cruel. But what is jealousy when it is born from endless betrayal? Zeus humiliated her again and again, flaunting his affairs, turning mortal women into divine tragedies. Yet Hera, bound by divine law and cosmic image, could not leave him. She ruled beside him, but never as his equal. This was Zeus's pattern. Everyone was granted power, but no one was allowed independence. Poseidon ruled the seas, but only so long as he bowed to Olympus. Hades ruled the underworld, but was exiled to the shadows. Athena, born of Zeus's mind, was wise, but never free. Even his children were weapons. Heroes like Heracles were not just champions, they were tools of Zeus's will, sent to reshape the world according to divine preference. And what of mortals? To humans, Zeus was a paradox. He was the god who protected guests, yet violated women in their own homes. He was the god of justice, yet ruled through favoritism. He was the sky father, yet never acted like a father. Entire cities were destroyed by Zeus's storms not for crimes, but for displeasing him. In the myth of Troy, Zeus watched as thousands died, not out of necessity, but because fate, a fate he had helped design, demanded it. The suffering of mortals was entertainment. The will of Zeus was law. But the most chilling truth of all was this. Zeus believed he was good. Unlike Cronus, who ruled through naked fear, Zeus ruled through moral certainty. He saw himself as the architect of balance, the guardian of cosmic stability. In his mind, every punishment was justified, every cruelty necessary. This is what made him terrifying. A tyrant who knows he is cruel can be challenged. A tyrant who believes he is righteous cannot. And yet, Zeus was not purely evil. He did prevent chaos. He did stop monsters. He did protect the fragile structure of the universe from collapsing into primal darkness. Without him, reality might have fallen back into the endless brutality of the Titans. Zeus was not wrong when he said the world needed order. He was wrong in believing that only he could provide it. In the deepest, most secret corners of Olympus, there are whispers, old prophecies, forgotten warnings, echoes of what Gaia once said. No king lasts forever, not even one made of thunder. Zeus himself knew this. That was why he feared his children. That was why he crushed rebellion. That was why he controlled fate. Because somewhere deep inside the god of the sky lived a terrified child. The same child who had hidden in a cave, waiting for Cronus to be defeated. The cycle had never ended. It had only changed its face. So what was Zeus? A god? Yes. A monster? Also yes. But more than anything, Zeus was a mirror. A reflection of power itself. How it begins with noble purpose, how it justifies cruelty, and how it ultimately devours those who wield it. He was the savior who became the storm, the liberator who became the law, the rebel who became the throne. And perhaps that is the most tragic truth of all. Zeus did not fail because he was evil. He failed because he was human, with the power of a god. Conclusion. Zeus stands at the center of myth not because he was the strongest, but because he was the one who survived long enough to define the story. He ended the age of the Titans and brought order to a shattered cosmos. Yet in doing so, he built a new world upon the same foundation of fear, force, and absolute power. To some, he will always be the hero who saved the universe from ancient darkness. To others, he is merely the darkness wearing a brighter crown. What makes Zeus unforgettable is not his lightning or his throne, but his contradiction. He was capable of justice, yet addicted to control. He defended order, yet constantly violated it when it suited his desires. He punished tyranny, yet never truly escaped becoming a tyrant himself. In Zeus, we see a truth that extends far beyond mythology. That power does not corrupt only the wicked. It transforms even those who begin with noble intentions. And so Zeus remains suspended between god and monster, neither fully one nor the other. His story is not simply about divine wars and thunderbolts, but about the fragile boundary between leadership and domination. In the end, Zeus did not prove that the cycle of tyranny could be broken. He proved how difficult it is to escape it, even for a god. Preface: The Forgotten Pages of Olympus. In classical Greek mythology, Zeus is immortalized as the supreme god, the embodiment of justice, order, and absolute authority. His thunderbolts are said to maintain balance in the cosmos, and his rule over Olympus is often portrayed as both rightful and inevitable. Yet mythology, like history itself, is never a single, unbroken truth. It is a tapestry woven by victors, poets, and those who possess the power to decide which stories deserve to survive. Beyond the celebrated epics and heroic hymns lies a quieter realm of forgotten narratives, stories deliberately obscured, altered, or erased from collective memory. These lost accounts do not merely challenge Zeus's divinity. They challenge the very idea that absolute power can coexist with absolute truth. What if Olympus, beneath its radiant marble and eternal light, was built upon silenced voices and rewritten destinies? Ancient fragments, disputed interpretations, and shadowed oral traditions suggest that Zeus was not only a ruler, but also a curator of memory. Through myth and ritual, he shaped how the cosmos remembered the Titanomachy, the fall of the old gods, and the rise of a new divine order. Those who opposed him did not simply lose. They were transformed into monsters, villains, or cautionary tales. This preface invites the reader to step beyond official mythology and peer into the shadows it avoids. Not to destroy the image of Zeus, but to understand him more fully, as a god of thunder, yes, but also of silence, fear, and carefully guarded truths. Part 1. Zeus, the author of his own history. According to official Greek mythology, Zeus is remembered as the great liberator, the god who overthrew the Titans, freed the cosmos from tyranny, and established an era of divine order under Olympian rule. This narrative, repeated through epics, hymns, and temple inscriptions, presents Zeus as both hero and lawgiver, a necessary force of balance against the chaos of primordial gods. Yet beneath this polished mythology lies a more troubling possibility, that Zeus did not merely inherit history, he rewrote it. History, whether human or divine, is rarely shaped by truth alone. It is shaped by survival, dominance, and control over memory. Zeus, having emerged victorious from the Titanomachy, possessed not only unmatched power but something far more influential, the authority to define what the war meant, who the villains were, and why his rule was inevitable. In this sense, Zeus was not just a conqueror of the old gods, but the architect of a new historical narrative. The Titanomachy, liberation or replacement. In the traditional account, the Titanomachy is framed as a righteous rebellion. Cronus, the devourer of his own children, embodies fear, stagnation, and cruelty. Zeus rises as the savior, freeing his siblings and restoring cosmic justice. However, several lesser-known fragments, some real, some speculative, others reconstructed through philosophical interpretation, suggest that the Titans were not a unified force of evil. Certain Titans represented concepts that threatened centralized authority: mnemosyne, memory, Themis, divine law, and even Prometheus, foresight and rebellion. These figures, in alternative interpretations, did not oppose Zeus out of malice, but out of resistance to absolute rule. Their defeat, therefore, was not merely a military victory, it was an ideological purge. In post-war Olympus, Titans who could not be assimilated were cast into Tartarus and later remembered as monsters, traitors, or forces of chaos. The narrative was simplified: Titans bad, Olympians good. Complexity was sacrificed for stability. By controlling the story of the war, Zeus ensured that no future god would question whether the old order had any virtues worth remembering. The erasure of dissent. Power does not only silence enemies through force, it silences them through omission. One of the most unsettling aspects of Zeus's rule is not whom he punished, but whom history forgot. Several divine figures appear briefly in early myths, only to vanish without explanation. Scholars and modern mythographers have long debated these disappearances, but a darker interpretation suggests intentional erasure. In fictionalized oral traditions, Zeus is said to have convened secret councils following the Titanomachy, assemblies where surviving deities were required to swear loyalty to Olympus. Those who refused were not always destroyed. Some were absorbed into abstract concepts, others demoted to minor spirits, their identities fragmented until they no longer posed a threat. To be forgotten, in the divine realm, was a fate worse than death. Mortals worshipped names they knew. Gods without stories lost relevance, power, and eventually existence. Zeus understood this intimately. By monopolizing worship and myth, he ensured that remembrance itself became a weapon. Myth as a tool of governance. Zeus ruled not only through thunderbolts, but through storytelling. Myths were the laws of the ancient world, moral frameworks disguised as divine tales. By shaping these myths, Zeus defined what obedience looked like and what rebellion cost. Stories of mortals who defied Zeus almost always end in tragedy. Prometheus chained, Sisyphus condemned, Tantalus eternally punished. These myths functioned as warnings, reinforcing the idea that challenging divine authority was not heroic, but foolish. Rarely do these tales explore the motives of the punished. Their voices are secondary to the lesson imposed. In this light, Zeus becomes less a god of justice and more a god of precedent. Justice, under his rule, is not impartial, it is consistent. And consistency, when wielded by absolute power, becomes indistinguishable from inevitability. The control of memory and time. Among the most revealing myths is Zeus's relationship with Mnemosyne, the Titaness of memory. From their union came the Muses, patrons of art, history, and poetry. Symbolically, this is profound. Memory itself submits to Zeus, giving birth to narratives that glorify his reign. Some speculative traditions suggest this was no coincidence. By aligning himself with memory, Zeus ensured that history would sing his praises. Poets inspired by the Muses were, knowingly or not, participants in the reinforcement of Olympian ideology. Their songs immortalized Zeus not as a ruler with flaws, but as a cosmic necessity. Even time bowed to Zeus's authority. Cronus, the embodiment of time, was defeated and imprisoned. Whether literal or symbolic, this act represents the severing of cyclical history. Under Zeus, time no longer devours its children. Instead, it stagnates under eternal rule, unchanging, unquestioned. Victory as moral authority. Perhaps the most dangerous myth Zeus perpetuated was the idea that victory itself equals righteousness. By winning the cosmic war, Zeus inherited moral legitimacy. His actions, no matter how cruel or contradictory, were justified by the simple fact that he stood at the top. This logic mirrors that of many empires throughout human history. Those who write history rarely ask whether their rule is just, they ask only whether it is stable. Zeus's Olympus, shining and orderly, may therefore represent not moral perfection, but the final stage of successful domination. The gods beneath him obeyed not because Zeus was flawless, but because resistance had been proven futile. Over time, obedience became tradition, and tradition became truth. A god who feared being remembered differently. Ironically, Zeus's obsession with controlling history may reveal his greatest fear, not rebellion, but reinterpretation. A future where the Titanomachy is re-examined, where Prometheus is seen as a martyr rather than a criminal, where Cronus is remembered not only as a tyrant, but as a ruler who feared replacement. Zeus understood that myths evolve. Each retelling carries the risk of exposure. And so he did what all absolute rulers do. He anchored his legacy in sacred texts, rituals, and fear. But cracks remain. In the silences between myths, in the unanswered questions, in the gods who vanish without explanation, there are hints of a history that refuses to stay buried. A version of Olympus where Zeus is not merely a hero, but a master editor of reality itself. Conclusion of Part 1. Zeus did not simply rule the cosmos. He defined how the cosmos would remember being ruled. Through force, fear, and narrative control, he transformed victory into virtue and dominance into destiny. Whether he was a necessary stabilizer or the first divine autocrat remains unresolved. But one truth emerges clearly. The thunderbolt that secured Zeus's throne was only half his power. The other half was the story told afterward. And history, once written by a god, is the hardest thing of all to challenge. Part 2. The affairs misnamed as love. In official Greek mythology, Zeus's countless romantic encounters are often portrayed as expressions of divine passion, playful, seductive, and sometimes tragic, but rarely condemned. These stories are retold as tales of desire between gods and mortals, framed as inevitable consequences of Zeus's overwhelming charisma and godly nature. Yet when examined beyond poetic tradition, a darker interpretation emerges. What if these encounters were not love stories at all, but exercises of unchecked power? What if mythology softened their language not to preserve romance, but to protect authority? To call these relationships affairs is already an act of mythological generosity. In many cases, they more closely resemble coercion disguised as destiny. Zeus, as the supreme god, existed in a realm where consent was structurally impossible for those beneath him. Mortals could not refuse a god without risking annihilation, and even lesser deities were bound by divine hierarchy. In such a world, desire itself becomes weaponized. Power imbalance as divine normalcy. One of the most unsettling features of Zeus's romantic mythology is how normalized extreme power imbalance becomes. Zeus approaches mortal women not as an equal, but as a force of nature, arriving as a swan, a bull, a golden rain, or a sudden storm. These transformations are traditionally interpreted as symbols of seduction or divine creativity. Yet from another perspective, they represent the erasure of agency. To be confronted by a god in disguise is to be denied informed choice. The mortal does not know whom she is dealing with until it is too late. By the time Zeus reveals himself, the encounter has already been framed as fate. Myth thus reframes violation as inevitability, absolving the god while sanctifying the outcome. In this framework, love is not mutual affection. It is submission to overwhelming force. silenced voices of mortal women. Perhaps the most striking omission in Zeus's romantic myths is the absence of female perspective. We hear of Europa's beauty, Leda's astonishment, Danae's isolation, but rarely their consent. Their emotional responses are condensed into single lines, if mentioned at all. The narrative moves swiftly from encounter to consequence, focusing not on trauma, but on offspring. Children born from these unions, heroes, kings, demigods, become the justification for the act itself. Their greatness retroactively sanctifies the violence that preceded them. The woman's suffering becomes irrelevant once a hero emerges. In mythological logic, outcome outweighs experience. Some speculative traditions imagine that these women did speak, but their voices were not preserved. Oral stories passed among mortal women may have told a different version, one of fear, confusion, and divine intrusion. But such stories lacked temples, bards, and patron gods to protect them. They faded, replaced by hymns praising Zeus's virility and generosity. Hera, the miscast villain. No figure suffers more from narrative distortion than Hera. In official mythology, she is portrayed as jealous, vindictive, and cruel, punishing Zeus's lovers and children rather than confronting Zeus himself. This portrayal conveniently shifts moral blame away from the supreme god and onto the wronged wife. Yet this framing ignores a crucial reality. Hera could not challenge Zeus directly without destabilizing Olympus. Her power, though immense, was still subordinate. Her acts of vengeance may therefore be interpreted not as cruelty, but as displaced resistance, misdirected anger in a system where confronting the source of harm was impossible. Some fictionalized interpretations suggest Hera was acutely aware of how mythology would judge her. By allowing herself to be cast as the villain, she preserved Olympus's fragile order while silently absorbing its moral cost. In doing so, she became a scapegoat for Zeus's excesses, her rage immortalized, her pain trivialized. Divine consent and the illusion of choice. Even among goddesses, Zeus's romantic dominance raises troubling questions. His relationship with Métis, for example, ends with her being swallowed whole, an act justified by prophecy and fear of overthrow. Love, in this case, becomes indistinguishable from preemptive violence. Similarly, Zeus's pursuit of goddesses often ends in transformation, imprisonment, or absorption into Olympian structure. What appears as union is frequently erasure. The goddess remains, but her autonomy does not. These stories suggest that within Olympus itself, consent was conditional, granted only when it aligned with Zeus's security. Love that threatened power was eliminated. Love that reinforced hierarchy was celebrated. Myth as moral disguise. By framing coercion as romance, mythology performs a subtle act of moral laundering. Zeus is not depicted as a predator, but as a lover. His victims are not traumatized, but honored by divine attention. This narrative serves a clear function. It preserves the image of Zeus as a benevolent ruler while normalizing domination. This pattern mirrors real-world systems of power, where abuse is reframed as privilege and resistance as ingratitude. Mythology thus becomes not just storytelling, but ideological training, teaching mortals to accept inequality as divine will. The repetition of these stories reinforces the lesson. To be chosen by power is a blessing, regardless of the cost. The children who inherit the silence. The demigod children of Zeus occupy a strange moral space. Celebrated as heroes, they are living proof of Zeus's reach across worlds. Yet their very existence depends on the silencing of their mothers. Many of these heroes suffer deeply, abandoned, hunted, or cursed from birth. Heracles is driven mad. Perseus grows up in exile. Dionysus is torn from his mother's womb. Their suffering may be read as echoes of the injustice that created them. In some interpretations, these heroes unconsciously carry the unresolved trauma of divine coercion. Their violence, instability, and isolation are not flaws, but symptoms of a system that confuses power with love, rewriting love in a world of gods. If we strip away poetic language and divine justification, Zeus's romantic mythology becomes a study in unchecked authority. Love is not an exchange, but an imposition. Desire flows in one direction. Refusal is unthinkable. This does not diminish Zeus's complexity, it deepens it. He becomes not merely a flawed god, but a reflection of a world where power defines morality. His relationships reveal Olympus not as a paradise, but as a hierarchy sustained by silence. Conclusion of Part 2. The affairs of Zeus were not misunderstood romances. They were carefully named illusions. By calling them love, mythology protected power from scrutiny and transformed domination into destiny. The true tragedy lies not only in what Zeus did, but in how thoroughly the system ensured it would never be questioned. In the end, these stories ask an uncomfortable question. If love cannot exist without consent, then what was truly divine about Zeus's desire? Perhaps the most radical act is not to condemn Zeus outright, but to listen to the women whose voices were lost, to the silences between verses, and to the myths that tremble when reread through human eyes. Because when power defines love, silence becomes sacred, and that may be the darkest myth of all. Part 3. Zeus and the fear of overthrow. At the height of his power, Zeus appears invincible. He rules the sky, commands thunder and lightning, presides over Olympus, and enforces cosmic order. No god openly challenges him. No titan rises again. The universe, at least on the surface, seems stable. Yet beneath this apparent permanence lies a persistent and corrosive fear, the fear of being overthrown. This fear is not incidental. It is foundational. Zeus's authority is born from rebellion. He did not inherit the cosmos peacefully. He seized it by force from his father, Cronus. And because his rise mirrors Cronus's fall, Zeus understands something few rulers ever admit. Power gained through overthrow carries within it the certainty of repetition. What has happened once can happen again. Thus, Zeus's reign is not merely about ruling the present. It is about preventing the future. The curse of the successor. The defining trauma of Zeus's existence is inheritance itself. Cronus devoured his children out of fear that one would replace him, fulfilling a prophecy he could not escape. Zeus survived, rebelled, and fulfilled that prophecy. In doing so, he did not break the cycle, he completed it. Official mythology portrays Zeus as wiser than his father, a ruler who learned from Cronus's mistakes. But learning does not always lead to transcendence. Sometimes it leads to refinement. Where Cronus used brute violence, Zeus used foresight, strategy, and narrative control. Where Cronus swallowed his children, Zeus swallowed Métis. The act is often explained as cleverness, a necessary step to prevent a dangerous prophecy. But stripped of poetic justification, it is a chilling repetition, the elimination of a future threat before it can speak. Athena's later birth, from Zeus's own head, is framed as miraculous. Yet it also symbolizes a closed system of power. Wisdom, war, and governance are born from Zeus alone. No independent lineage remains. Métis and the fear of thought. Métis, the Titaness of wisdom and cunning, represents more than a prophetic danger. She embodies strategic intelligence, the kind that does not rely on force. Zeus's decision to consume her is often interpreted as a preventive act against a foretold son greater than his father. But another interpretation is possible. Zeus did not fear a child. He feared thought that could rival his own. By absorbing Métis, Zeus internalized wisdom while destroying its autonomy. From that point on, intelligence exists only as an extension of Zeus's will. Athena, though formidable, never challenges his authority. She advises, strategizes, and executes, but always within the framework of Olympian hierarchy. This act reveals a crucial aspect of Zeus's psychology. He does not merely fear physical rebellion. He fears conceptual alternatives, ways of thinking about power that do not place him at the center. The surveillance of Olympus. Unlike the chaotic reign of the Titans, Zeus's Olympus is orderly, structured, and deeply monitored. Gods have domains, responsibilities, and boundaries. On the surface, this appears to be governance. Beneath it, it functions as containment. Every god is powerful, but none are whole. Poseidon controls the sea, but not the sky. Hades rules the dead, but is isolated from Olympus. Ares embodies violence, but lacks strategy. Apollo sees the future, but does not rule it. Each god is given power, but never enough to threaten the throne. This fragmentation is intentional. Zeus does not centralize power by hoarding it. He distributes it strategically, ensuring dependence. Olympus becomes a network of controlled competencies, all requiring Zeus's coordination. Even rebellion, when it occurs, is limited. The myth of Hera, Athena, and Poseidon conspiring to overthrow Zeus ends not with revolution, but humiliation. Zeus escapes, punishes, and restores order. The lesson is clear. Dissent is possible, but futile. Law is a weapon against fate. Zeus is often called the god of justice, but justice under Zeus is not neutral. It is preventive. His laws are not merely responses to wrongdoing. They are mechanisms designed to suppress the emergence of threats. Prophecies, in particular, terrify Zeus. Unlike enemies, they cannot be struck by lightning. They exist outside time, immune to force. Zeus's response is to control or eliminate those who speak them. Oracles are bound by ritual. Seers are cursed with disbelief. Prophets are punished for clarity. The future, under Zeus's reign, is not abolished, but it is blurred. By destabilizing prophecy, Zeus turns fate into noise. Nothing is clear enough to act upon. In this ambiguity, his rule survives. The punishment of Prometheus, a warning to the future. No myth better illustrates Zeus's fear of overthrow than the punishment of Prometheus. Officially, Prometheus is punished for stealing fire and deceiving Zeus. But fire is not merely a tool, it is a symbol of autonomy. Fire allows mortals to build, create, and eventually question gods. Prometheus does not threaten Zeus with armies. He threatens him with progress. Zeus's response is not proportionate, it is exemplary. Eternal punishment, publicly displayed, serves as a warning across time. This is not justice. It is deterrence. Prometheus becomes a living message. Foresight leads to suffering. Rebellion leads to eternity in chains. And yet, paradoxically, the myth preserves Prometheus's defiance. Zeus cannot erase him completely. In punishing Prometheus, Zeus reveals the limits of his control. The gods who disappear. Perhaps the most unsettling evidence of Zeus's fear lies not in punishment, but in absence. Certain divine figures vanish from mythology without explanation. Minor gods fade. Titans are forgotten. Spirits dissolve into abstraction. These disappearances suggest a quieter method of control, erasure. A god without worship ceases to matter. A myth untold loses power. Zeus does not need to kill every threat. He only needs to ensure it is no longer remembered. In this way, Zeus governs not just the present, but memory itself. What is forgotten cannot return. Eternal rule as stagnation. Zeus's ultimate triumph is stability. But stability, when prolonged indefinitely, becomes stagnation. Olympus does not evolve. Power does not rotate. There is no succession plan, only prevention. Unlike human kings, Zeus cannot die. And so, the problem of succession becomes infinite. His fear does not end, it compounds. Every generation that passes without challenge reinforces the myth of inevitability. Zeus becomes less a ruler and more a condition of existence. To imagine a world without Zeus becomes impossible. And yet, that impossibility is itself a weakness. Systems that cannot imagine their end are unprepared for it. The paradox of absolute power. Zeus's greatest strength is also his greatest vulnerability. Absolute power requires absolute vigilance. There can be no rest, no trust, no true intimacy. Every ally is a potential successor. Every child is a possible prophecy. In this sense, Zeus is profoundly alone. He sits atop Olympus not as a king among peers, but as a singularity. All relationships are vertical. Love becomes risky. Trust becomes impossible. Fear becomes policy. Zeus rules forever, but never peacefully. Rebellion as an idea, not an event. Perhaps the most radical interpretation of Zeus's fear is that rebellion has already occurred, not in war, but in thought. Each retelling of myth that questions Zeus's morality is a quiet insurrection. Each reinterpretation that sympathizes with titans, women, or punished figures destabilizes the official narrative. Zeus cannot strike down interpretation. The more absolute his power becomes, the more fragile his story grows. And stories, unlike gods, do not obey. Conclusion of Part 3. Zeus's fear of overthrow is not a weakness. It is the engine of his rule. It shapes his laws, his relationships, and his mythology. He is not merely a god who fears losing power. He is a god who understands that power is temporary, even when eternal. In trying to prevent the future, Zeus freezes it. In trying to silence fate, he amplifies it. His reign becomes a monument to control and a warning about its cost. The tragedy of Zeus is not that he is cruel or unjust or flawed. It is that he is aware. Aware that no throne is truly eternal. Aware that history repeats. Aware that one day, someone will read the myths differently. And that reinterpretation, not rebellion, may finally be what brings Olympus to an end. Because when a god must control the future to survive the present, the end has already begun. Conclusion: hidden truths do not weaken Zeus. The stories concealed by official mythology do not diminish Zeus. They transform him. They strip away the simplicity of divine perfection and reveal something far more enduring, a ruler shaped by power, fear, and contradiction. Zeus does not become weaker when examined closely. On the contrary, he becomes more formidable because he becomes more real. To acknowledge the hidden truths of Olympus is not to dethrone Zeus, but to understand the nature of absolute authority. Zeus is not merely the god of thunder. He is the embodiment of dominance sustained over time. His strength lies not only in lightning and law, but in narrative control, memory, and silence. These are the tools that allow power to survive long after force alone would fail. By confronting the stories that were softened, renamed, or erased, we are not condemning Zeus. We are questioning the system that required such erasure in the first place. The suppressed voices, the distorted loves, and the vanished gods do not weaken Olympus. They expose its foundations. And foundations, once seen, can no longer pretend to be eternal truths. In the end, Zeus remains supreme not because he is morally flawless, but because he is structurally invincible, at least within the world he designed. Yet even this invincibility has limits. Myths evolve. Interpretations shift. What was once unquestionable becomes debatable. The greatest threat to absolute power is not rebellion, but understanding. And as long as these hidden stories continue to be told, Zeus will endure, not as an untouchable idol, but as a timeless warning that every throne, even a divine one, stands upon truths it cannot fully erase.